In this video, we're going to talk about the terminologies and how to express them in fish. Now, this one's a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to actually start with just a conceptual explanation of terminologies, and we actually won't even get too deep into it, just a very brief introduction to terminologies. And then in the next video, we'll talk more about the hands-on and how you do it in fish. So let's begin. Terminologies, you've probably seen some of this already, is basically a way to constrain a data element to a specific set of code. So on the screen here, there's three examples. Telecom.system is constrained to this value set called contact point system, has a binding strength of required, and it can only come from those codes that you see on the screen: phone, fax, email, pager. Same thing with use, telecom.use only can come from contact point use, and it can only be those codes: home, work, temp, ode, mobile, things like that. And then gender, administrative gender, value set, binding strength of required, and can only be male, female, other, or unknown. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this. When it comes to terminologies, it's pretty tricky. And I would say right now, there's three big concepts that you really want to understand when it comes to terminologies. One is the code system. So think about SNOMED, LOINC, RX norm, ICD-10. It's just some thing or entity that defines a set of codes. If you go say code 1234, that doesn't have any meaning. But when you say 1234 from LOINC and you go look it up, it can actually tell you it's like some concept, like usually like some lab or some observation, something like that. That's actually a fabricated code, obviously. And then there's value sets, which is like some subset of codes from a code system. So you might have, a particular ethnicity like Chinese or African or Indonesian or Caucasian, something like that. And it comes from a code system, like it could be the CDC or OMB. Right. And then you could have a set of glucose labs, which would be just a subset of LOINC codes, for example. Right. Or it could be antibiotics, which would be a subset of RX norm codes. So a value set is like a subset of codes from a code system. All right. Next is concept maps, which is just a way of crosswalking between two different systems. And two very common ones that you would do this for would be like ICD-10 codes to SNOMED CT codes. Usually that's more like a one-to-many because SNOMED is much more expressive. And then there might be some where it's like NDC to RX norm. And then these can go backwards sometimes as well. So that's just kind of the concept map. I'm not going to talk a lot about concept maps in here because that'll be another whole topic. We're mainly going to focus on the general code system and value set because you need to understand that to actually constrain data elements and write fish. So I'm going to use an example here of a restaurant. Okay. We want to profile this concept of restaurant. And within a restaurant, we have three concepts here. We want to think about a license, like a business license, like a LLC or corp. You have a set of chefs that cook your food. You have the cuisines that you will serve, but you don't serve all the cuisines. So you serve a subset of cuisines. Okay. So we want to profile this and we want to have to use code systems and value sets to do that. And so here are the concepts, right? License, chef, and cuisine in a restaurant. And how you would do it is you define each of those concepts using a code system. So the license, for example, would have a code system that is defined externally because we don't get to create our own Brian's LLC or Tom's LLC or Jill's corporation. We don't do that. Someone has defined it for us. So it's an external code system for licenses. And on the screen here, you see LLC and Corp. Now, chef would be an internal code system because it's our own thing. We decide who to hire. We define who those chefs are. And in this case, it's Jill and Joe, right? And then the last one would be cuisine. And this would probably be more like a external code system because, more or less, people know that there's Italian food, Japanese food, Chinese food, Ethiopian food, different types of food that's out there, right? And there's like tons of them and it's too many to name. So I have just X cuisine there to note that there's many of them. Now, when we're talking about FHIR, you don't use the code system to set the constraint. You actually use the value set. And that's actually what's showing on the screen here. You don't make up any licenses and you say it only can come from these possible licenses here. And because you can't make it up, it's going to be required, which means you just can't change it. And then for chefs, you would have a value set for chefs. And in this case, it would be extensible because it's not required because you can perhaps hire more chefs. And the last one would be current cuisines, which, yeah, you can cook Italian, Japanese, but you can probably in the future, if you wanted to, expand to other cuisines. So it's extensible. All right. So we're going to dig into each one of these and give you a quick flavor of what the fish looks like and talk a little bit about how we might express this. So when we talk about licenses, we talked about it earlier, which is this is likely a external code system because these are business licenses, LLCs and corps and all those different types of licenses are externally defined. There's a very well-defined definition for them, and we can't make up our own. So this is external, and then the binding is required because we can't fabricate it. And then the relationship between code system and value set is that the value set in this case would contain all the codes from the code system because whenever we're opening a restaurant, we're not limited to only LLC and corp. We can choose one of them. We're not limited. We can't. It's not like in the U.S. you can only have an LLC. No, that's not true. You can have an LLC, a corp, and whatever other ones are there. And then if we move to the fish, this is kind of what it looks like. This should look very similar. At the very top, you have your declaration, you're building up value sets, you have your keywords, and at the very bottom, the syntax is that you would include codes from the system, which is code system, licenses. And this is actually a usage of an alias. We'll talk about that later, but it's just a way to quickly reference. It's an alias. It's a way to reference a shortened word that references the entire code system. As the code system usually is some longer URL that you would use. So you just say all codes from licenses, and that's how you would express it in Fish. Next would be like available chefs. So this is again a internal code system because we define who the chefs are, but the binding is extensible. I probably shouldn't have wrote required here because you can always hire more. So the binding is extensible, and in that case, the relationship is that the value set contains all the codes from the code system because you have your roster of chefs that can work at your restaurant. We're not going to limit any one of them. We want all of them to work there. So your value set would then look like this, very similar to before. You just have your declaration keywords, and then your rules just include codes from your system of chefs, and your chefs will have Jill and Joe in it. Now, when it comes to the current cuisines, this will be a external code system, as we talked about earlier, because there is some outside world that has defined the concept of cuisines. It's pretty ubiquitous and it's quite large. So in this case, we don't want all the cuisines. We want to say that we only serve Italian and Japanese. So the value set in this case, the relationship specifically, will include only specific codes from the code system. And then if you remember earlier, so we have your alias here. So you have an alias for cuisines. It starts with that $sign. And then remember, whenever you're talking about codes in Fish, it's a pound sign. So in this case, it's the pound Italian and pound Japanese. So you have a way to express, I only cook Italian food or Japanese food from this code system defined in cuisines. All right, that's how you would do it. I'll give you one more example here. Let's say one day you decide you want to be very innovative and you want to cook fusion cuisine, something that's super new and no one's ever done before. Well, in this case, you probably would define your own additional internal code system for fusion cuisines because no one's ever created it before and you want to do it for the first time. So you would create a new internal code system that represents those cuisines you want to cook. In this case, maybe it's like a fusion between Italian and Japanese or French and Chinese, something like that. And then the relationship in this case would be that the value set contains still the specific codes from cuisine, the Italian and Japanese, but then it will also include all codes from the system fusion cuisines, which is the new code system that you created. All right, so hopefully that is helpful introduction. In the next video, we'll talk more about doing this in Fish.